Hello, everyone. Good evening from Amsterdam. Welcome to this webinar. It's evening for me. I know for a lot of you, it may not be evening. Nice to see you all. Like I said, if you're here right now, live would be fun if you could share in the chat where you live. I see that some people have already been doing that. I always love to see this. We got people from Romania, Canada, Southern Europe, Colorado, Chicago, Portsmouth, Port Hueneme. I don't know. I might be butchering that, Randy. New York City. Very cool. Thanks everybody from doing that. I love to see that. So this is the prioritizing your deep work webinar. I'll start the actual webinar in just a minute, but I would like to let you all know how the interface works. We're in Webinar Ninja right now. I like Webinar Ninja a lot. Hey, Sharon. Hey, nice to see you. Webinar Ninja is great. And so if you scroll down a little bit, sort of below me, you'll see that there is a questions feature. And so we're going to have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. And if you have a question, you can ask it at any time. But I do like to have those questions come up in the questions feature rather than in the chat, because I try to keep a little bit of an eye on the chat while I'm talking, but it's difficult to talk and read the chat at the same time. So if you ask your question in the questions feature, then when I answer them, I'll also mark when I start answering and when I stop answering your question. And so for people watching the recording later, or if you want to watch the webinar again, you can actually just click to the specific question. So this is super convenient. Arthur asks, is it only him having issues hearing me correctly? So if other people could share whether they can hear me correctly, that would be very helpful, because I am working with a new microphone today, brand new, just came in today. So, so it would be really good to know. Okay, thanks. That's good to know. Thank you very much. Sorry, Arthur. Sounds like you're going to have to figure this out on your end. All righty then. So let's go ahead and get started. And I have some slides today, so I'll pull those up. Can you all see the slides too? Be good to know. So, yeah, thanks for confirming that. Today we're talking about prioritizing your deep work, which I think is an incredibly important topic, and which a lot of people don't think about, or maybe we think about it subconsciously and not so much consciously. So today, let's think about this topic in a very deliberate way. And figure out how we can prioritize your deep work, which really will help you thrive at whatever it is that you really want to do, the work that really matters, okay? So quick agenda for today. I'll just introduce myself briefly. Then we're going to talk about what deep work actually is, because it always helps to be on the same page when you talk about stuff, and why it matters. So then we'll talk about how you can identify what deep work is for you, like what that looks like, literally which work activities that you do are your deep work. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can plan your deep work and how you can actually make sure you're executing on it consistently. Then we'll have some Q&A, and at the end, I'll wrap up. So, and at the end, when I'm wrapping up, I'll also tell you a little bit about a live program that I've got called Big Picture Productivity, but more about that at the end. Okay, so who am I? Just in case you're new, my name is Peter Uckes, and I'm a former litigation consultant. That's why I started doing my first job out of college, working in litigation consulting, basically defending big companies in court, but not the law side, but more the doing the analysis side on the big lawsuits. Well, burned out from that and decided I wanted to start my own business. And after trying a bunch of different business ideas, I ended up being a productivity teacher, which sort of kind of came naturally to me and which I enjoy a lot. And so these days I have 3 productivity courses, and I've now had over 1,000 paying students, most of whom are very happy. So it makes me happy too. They're called Organize Your Life with Things 3, Get Stuff Done with OmniFocus 3, and Big Picture Productivity. And so more about Big Picture Productivity later, like I said. Aside from productivity stuff, I'm also into scuba diving, public speaking. I'm vegan. I really like Formula One. I was just watching a Formula One qualification earlier. I don't know if any of you are into that. You can let me know in the chat. Philadelphia Eagles, an American football team that's not doing so hot this season. And I'm also, I've had a lifelong interest in World War II history. So if we have any of those things in common, let me know. You're also welcome to send me an email afterwards. I always like to hear this. Cool. Let's get into the topic of the actual webinar today. What is deep work, and why does this matter? Okay. So deep work is a phrase invented by Cal Newport in his book Deep Work. You know what? I have this book. Look at me using props. Here's Deep Work by Cal Newport. Great book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend reading Deep Work. And so he defines deep work as follows. He says it's professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration and that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. Okay, so we can break that down a little bit. It's professional activities, so not personal activities, okay? So bit of an arbitrary distinction, I think. I don't really see life as, work and non-work. Maybe a lot of people do, and especially if you have a job, it's like some things are for your job and some things are not. But if you've got your own business, the lines quickly blur. But anyway, I think it's things that you're trying to achieve some result, and it's not just things that you're doing for fun. Okay, I think that's what he means by professional activities. And so you're doing those in a state of distraction-free concentration. So it's work that you do that really you can only do when you're able to focus for like a long period of time. So we're not talking 20 minutes, we're talking like an hour or multiple hours. And it's got to be pushing your cognitive capabilities to their limit. So it can't be easy work, okay? It's got to be hard work, probably mentally taxing work. That's what deep work is. And Kyle also says this work is hard to replicate, and it creates new value because when you do like hard thinking, you can really come up with some stuff that people who are distracted, people who are not taking the time to be focused, are just not going to be able to come up with. So that's how you create new value. Now, some examples of deep work might be you're developing a marketing strategy for your company, okay? You're designing a new product. Maybe you're writing up research results in an academic paper. You can imagine how this might be deep work, right? Very difficult to do this if you're constantly distracted, whether that's your partner, if you're working from home now, constantly interrupting you, your kids, or even just like notifications coming in on your computer all the time. Very difficult to actually wrap your head around things. Another example is writing sales copy on your website. It was something that I have to do sometimes, or well, have to, and that I do sometimes. And that's hard, that takes focus. Planning your week, another example of deep work that a lot of people may not think of this as a deep work activity, but actually I think if you take the time to really plan your week properly, and if you're doing that in depth, like that takes hard thinking. It's not something you just kind of do when you're tired and you've got nothing else left to do. Hey, and of course, preparing a webinar is deep work too. So you can contrast this with shallow work, just the opposite of deep work, non-cognitively demanding tasks, often logistical style tasks, really easy to replicate, often performed while distracted, or at least you're able to perform them while distracted. So kind of processing your email inbox kind of thing. And they don't really generate that much value, shallow work activities. So some examples of that might be answering emails, attending meetings, setting up Zoom calls, formatting documents, or writing status updates for your boss, okay? I see Kyla ask, will we get the slides after? You'll be able to watch the recording after, so then you can go through the slides as well. Yeah. All right. So Cal Newport came up with what he says was the deep work hypothesis. And the deep work hypothesis is the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at exactly the same time that it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. As a consequence, the few who cultivate this skill and then make it the core of their working life will thrive. So basically, Cal says, deep work is hard and is becoming more valuable. You should be doing more deep work, right? That's basically what the hypothesis is. And this makes a lot of intuitive sense, right? If you're the academic researcher who is best able to write up their research results or to come up with new experiments or with new research, whatever, then you're going to thrive, right? You're going to get your articles published, et cetera. You're going to gain authority. And this is really true for anything, right? If you're designing a new product and you're constantly distracted, you're probably going to design a worse product. And the reason that Cal says it's becoming increasingly rare is just because our attention gets pulled in so many different directions these days, okay? Mainly because of smartphones that we have with us all the time and because of social media, right? That's what Cal's hypothesis is, and I think it makes a lot of intuitive sense. So, got that out of the way. We're talking about the same thing now, okay? how can you identify for you what your deep work is? Maybe this is super obvious to you already, or maybe it helps to kind of do a little exercise. So you can ask yourself, among all of my work activities, my professional activities, which ones require intense focus? Like, what can you absolutely not do with distractions around? And what requires you to just think really hard? Like, what's like, if you feel tired, I definitely can't do this. I need to do this when I've slept well. Maybe you had your coffee or whatever. Um, and maybe it's something that you do where you kind of like tell other people, hey, don't bother me for a while. Which activities are those? And you can also ask yourself what really moves the needle for your career or your business. That's often almost exactly the same thing. The things that really move the needle are the hard things. Um, and I also want you to think about including activities that you're not doing yet, but that you should be doing. Okay, so what your deep work, maybe you're not getting to your deep work. Maybe that's why you're here. Okay, and so don't just look at the things that you're already doing, but also things that you feel like you should be doing or could be doing maybe. So what I recommend is just making a list. Pretty simple. List all the work activities you perform, divide them into deep work and shallow work, and then describe the deep work as precisely as you can. Okay. And one thing you can do is if you're using a task manager, a lot of the times the task manager will have a logbook feature. So you kind of look at the task manager's logbook to jog your memory, just to like, so you're not forgetting about all the variety of tasks that you do on a weekly basis. And so if we were to do this exercise for me, then dividing my work activities into deep work and shallow work, I'll get some of these. So my deep work involves recording videos for my video courses, for my YouTube channel, designing new courses. So when I design a new course, I spend a lot of time creating a mind map of like, what should be the modules? What are the lessons going to be? In what order am I going to teach concepts, right? Where should I break down two lessons, or one lesson into two lessons? That kind of stuff that requires a lot of hard thinking. Running group sessions or like webinars, like I'm doing right now, requires a lot of focus. And writing copy for a course sales page. Those are some of the things I do that are deep work. What are shallow work things that I do? Helping students who can't log in to their course platform, which happens sometimes. Uploading my videos to YouTube after I've created them. Filing my tax returns. As a business owner, you got to deal with that stuff. I mean, you got to deal with that stuff as an individual too, but it's a little bit more work when you got a business. Formatting course workbooks, editing video transcripts. So those kind of things. Things that are necessary, but that I don't really need to have 100% of my attention. Maybe filing my tax returns, I kind of need 100% of my attention, but it's not really going to create much new value. It's kind of a requirement. Okay. So this is not useless work. You just want to make sure that the ratio between your deep and shallow work is good, right? So we're not saying that shallow work is useless work and you got to banish it from your life. But there has to be a balance. So what I also want you to do is to understand how much effort you're currently putting into your deep work. And you can kind of think of two resources that you have, your time and your energy. So what percentage of your time are you spending on your deep work? And so you can look at your weekly calendar. If you're a heavy calendar user, that may help a lot. If you don't know, measure the hours. So one thing I did a couple of years ago is actually for a couple of weeks in a row, I tracked whatever I did in 15-minute increments. Was that super fun, the exercise? No, it wasn't necessarily super fun, but it was really insightful. Okay, so I highly recommend doing that if you're not really sure actually what you're spending your time on. And what percentage of your energy, too, are you spending on your deep work? And energy and time are not always related, okay? Because let's say you are freshest in the morning, you get to the office, or now you get to your home office or your whatever, and you sit down and you work. And you really spend your entire morning when you're clearest. You have the most mental space available, most bandwidth, answering emails. If that's all you do in the morning, and then in the afternoon, you got your lunch, you got your post-lunch dip, and that's when you try to do the hard work. Maybe then your energy balance for your deep and shallow work is not so good. So I want you to think about the energy as well as the time. Understanding the scale of the problem will give you a lot of insight on how to fix it as well. So let's move on then to how you can actually plan and execute your deep work, because after all, we're talking about prioritizing it. So I always like to say, put on your consultant's hat. Okay, so imagine you're hiring a consultant, and this consultant is examining your deep work habits. they're observing you as you're going about your day or about your week. And what problems do you think they would identify? Right? Like which solutions to those problems would they suggest in the report that they're writing for you? So, for example, are they seeing that your kids are just coming to disturb you like all the time when it's not necessary? Or are they seeing that you're checking your phone every couple minutes? Um, and just look at the chat. It's very fun to look at the chat while I do this. Randy says, spent 36 years as a lawyer, keeping track of my time every day down a 6-minute interval, and he hated it. I know that feeling, Randy. When I worked as a litigation consultant, I also had to do that. There's a fudge factor sometimes, but yeah, it's you probably have a good sense of how you're spending your time, Randy. So back to the consultant's hat. Just try and look at your work activities as objectively as you can, right? So what prevents you from being in that sort of prolonged state of distraction-free concentration, working on those deep work activities? Now, after you've got a sense of what the problems are, let's talk about how to solve them. Okay, how can you create the conditions to be able to focus on your deep work? Okay, so we've also done the exercise of identifying your deep work, right? So you know what it is, and you know what the shallow work is. Okay, how can you create the conditions for focus? So we can kind of talk about physical conditions, mental conditions, and emotional conditions, and you can probably come up with some more, but these are the ones that we'll talk about. So physical conditions, you can ask yourself some really simple questions, like, is your environment noisy where you work, and does that bother you? Okay. Is your chair comfortable? I invested, yeah, you can't really see it right now, but I invested in a very fancy chair earlier this year because I realized I was going to be spending a lot of time at my desk for the foreseeable future. It makes a huge difference in being able to sit at my desk. Is your desk too messy? That could really be stopping you. Is your computer screen big enough? I mean, if you have a tiny computer screen, that can make it difficult to do certain kinds of work. Okay, so think about physical conditions. Then think about mental conditions. Are you sleeping well? Like, is the quality of your sleep good? Are you sleeping enough? Is the quantity of your sleep good? Do you need a vacation? Do you have trouble getting to your deep work because coworkers are constantly yapping in your ear, right? Maybe you're constantly logged into your Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever, and you're getting notifications coming in all the time, and your coworkers are expecting you to respond to those within like the hour or something like that. I mean, that's just rough on your brain. That's what I mean by mental conditions. Yeah. Um, could be that you need practice not grabbing your phone every 2 minutes. Like I was so bad at this for a long time. I still am pretty bad at, just grabbing my phone when I'm starting to feel some resistance. So I put it out of reach, so when I start working, like it's out of reach. I have to get up off my chair to look at my phone. And often that's a big enough barrier that I don't do it and I stay on task. So what about the emotional conditions when you're trying to do your deep work? Could be maybe you're having an argument with someone you love, and that's an unresolved argument that's really weighing on you. Then it's difficult to get the focus and sustain the focus that you need to do your deep work. Could be a bigger thing. Could be not a temporary argument, but maybe you just feel like you're not charging enough for your work. So like you're resisting your deep work. Let's say you're a web designer, you're designing a website for your client. That's your deep work, but you feel like you're not charging enough. So you kind of hate it. You have a lot of negative energy. At that point, that could be a real problem. So again, put on that consultant's hat and just like start going through this list. Like, do any of these things apply to you? Do you believe your work matters? I mean, this is a big one. If you feel like whatever you're doing, like nobody cares, it hasn't happened to me so much, but I talk to friends of mine who, especially they work for big companies that like do consulting work for other companies. Sometimes they're just, I'm writing a report, but like nobody's going to care. They're just doing this because the boss felt like he needed to spend some money, And so if you're in that state where the work you're doing, you feel like it's going to have no impact whatsoever, that can be really rough to then focus on it. So you gotta be honest with yourself about this. Now, creating those conditions for focus, that's going to look different for everyone. Okay. And you got to match your expectations to reality. So an example is if you have young kids and like they're home a lot right now, more so than usual, and you're working from home where normally you don't, yeah, you're not going to be able to do as much deep work as you would otherwise, right? So that's frustrating, but you do want to have a realistic expectation because otherwise you're just going to be disappointed. That said, you don't need to wait for perfect conditions. Okay. So you don't need to be sort of like single, living by yourself with like absolute quiet in an apartment where you never get bothered. Like it doesn't have to be like that. if that's something that would help you focus, right? So do what you can within your circumstances. Okay, if you're currently spending 1 hour a week on deep work and your maximum is 3 hours a week on deep work, then you still got, you're still tripling the time you're spending on your deep work, right? You may not be able to spend 20 hours on it like some other people might, but still a lot better than what you have right now. And I highly recommend that you deliberately set aside time for your deep work. And so that means don't let others schedule your time for you. It's especially true for those of you who work in a corporate environment. A lot of time people try and invite you to group meetings, and maybe you have some time between 1 and 5 in the afternoon. And you're like, that's like, I'm going to really dig into this project. And then you're invited to a meeting from 3 to 3:30, which really screws up your concentration. So I recommend blocking off time on your calendar if you're sort of in a shared calendar environment with people. But even if you don't, if you're not, for yourself, it's really helpful to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to work on my deep work for like 60 minutes or 90 minutes or 120 minutes, 2 hours, right? Just to set that intention. The intention already matters a lot. And so when you do this, each block, I recommend making it at least 60 minutes and up to several hours, okay? Because often it takes like 15 minutes just to sort of load your work project into your brain. And so if you're doing a 30 or 45-minute block, you're kind of losing a lot of that time. It's just not very efficient. And you can block time for your deep work, but you can also block time for your shallow work, for some of the shallow work anyway. And I like to batch it. So, for example, I run a community for some of my students, the Big Picture Productivity community. And I just go in there sort of, I try to do it every day and just read all the unread topics and reply to the ones that I find interesting, right? And I try to do that once a day, because if I start doing that sort of 5 or 6 times throughout the day, or even 12 times throughout the day, like what a lot of people check their email that frequently, it just destroys your focus. So batch that stuff too, and set aside time too. I mean, your shallow work takes time too. And so if you're setting aside time for your deep work and for batched shallow work, you're already massively ahead of most people. Another key portion of getting to your deep work is just saying no. Like sometimes you just have to say no to things, and nobody's going to do that for you. You have to do this. Tell people that you don't want to be disturbed. Turn on do not disturb on your devices. If people invite you to a meeting where your presence is useless, politely say, you know what? I don't think I'm going to end up contributing a lot to this meeting. I think it makes more sense for me to focus on XYZ deep work activity, right? You can say that to your boss. So involve your boss if you have one, okay? Your boss probably wants the same outcomes that you do. So if you're feeling some friction there, where they're the ones that are constantly inviting you to meetings, or that are expecting quick responses from you, have this conversation. Say, you know what? Like, I measured my time and I'm really only spending 10% of my time on deep work. Is that how you want it to be? Have that conversation. So I kind of want to talk a little bit also about how to handle deep work in your task manager, because I saw that some of you already mentioned my my task manager courses, which are great. Thank you very much, guys, for mentioning those in the chat. If you haven't checked those out yet, you can check those out. Just go to peterrockes.net and then courses. I'm a big fan of task managers. They really make a huge difference. I think everybody should be using a task manager consistently. You got to use a good one too. And task managers are really great for making lists of work that you want to do, and then working through the list. So an example is, let's say you're writing an article. Kind of break that down into a couple steps. You're going to outline the article, then you're going to write the article, then you're going to proofread it, and then you're going to publish it. Okay, so a lot of the times, just writing down those steps in your task manager already helps a lot. Helps a lot with being able to do it, with going through resistance that you might be feeling towards it. But at some point, you're going to hit these deep work tasks, like actually write the actual article. Those things are hard to break down. Your task manager is not going to write it for you. So at some point, you just have to do the hard work, okay? And if you find that it's difficult to do your deep work tasks, you know what they are, you've put aside time for them, but you just find it very difficult to actually do them, there's a couple things you can do. I recommend creating projects in your task manager with tasks to help yourself along. Okay, and if you've attended some of my other webinars, this may be a familiar technique to you. I think I talked about this in my webinar on habits as well. So create tasks that help you create those conditions for focus that we talked about earlier. So for example, you're finding it difficult to write, okay? And if your deep work involves writing, you can create some task in your task manager and then actually do these things. Create a playlist of music to listen to while writing. Okay, just sometimes you put on the right music, really helps you get in the zone. Block off time on your calendar for writing. We talked about this a couple minutes ago. Buy a distraction-free writing app. This really helps a lot, or it helps me a lot. I use IA Writer. Love this app. It really helps me focus more on my writing. It's like just the words, nothing else. Or perhaps you just got to buy some noise-canceling headphones if you're in an environment that's noisy. Okay, so think about what ancillary things could you do to make it more likely that you'll actually be able to have that sustained focus that you need for the deep work. So I want to leave you before we jump into Q&A with 3 to-dos, okay? And so the first one is really simple. We talked about this: divide your professional activities into deep work and shallow work. Just make that list. Then formulate projects and tasks to create the conditions for focus, like we were just talking about. Okay, so think, what ancillary things can you do to help yourself get in the zone to work on this deep work? And finally, plan it. Block off time on your calendar, right, for both the deep work and the shallow work, but especially the deep work. What are you going to do? Where are you going to do it? And when are you going to do it? Okay. And be very specific about this. If you're consistently doing these 3 things, you're going to end up doing more of your deep work than you're doing today. Okay. You're going to be able to prioritize it better. So those would be my 3 to-dos for you after you leave the webinar. Make that list. Okay. Think of the things you can do to help create those conditions for focus that are so crucial. Could also be something, by the way, like practicing not having your phone nearby. That could be a task too. That could be a habit that you're forming, right? Put your phone away. And be really specific about saying, when are you going to work on the deep work? Where are you going to work on it? And what exactly is it that you're going to do? Don't be vague about this. All right. That was the me teaching portion of this webinar. I want to open it up to Q&A right now. So if you are listening to this and you have a question, again, what you can do is you can actually scroll down to the questions tab and then ask your question right there. Okay, so preferably not in the chat, but preferably actually in the questions box. So I see that there's a question there. And I'll start answering this. So Based asks, which of the 4 deep work modes that Cal mentions in the book do you recommend? Yeah, this is interesting. For people who haven't read Deep Work by Cal Newport, he talks about different ways that you can create those conditions for focus. I don't remember the exact definitions of all of Cal's modes, but so one of them is monk mode. And monk mode is basically just like you go away from civilization for a while and you just like completely focus on your deep work for some time. Like if you've got a hut in the mountains, you're going to go to your hut in the mountains there and you're going to sit there and you're going to work on your deep work, okay, for a while before you come back to sort of reality, normal life. Another one is, I think, I forget what bimodal is, but basically another way you might do this is set aside like 2 hours every morning, so you're kind of like every morning from 10 to noon is your time to work on your deep work, okay? So again, I don't remember the exact definitions of the other ones, but what I would say is there's not one of these that I can recommend for everybody, okay? It's really going to depend on your circumstances. So again, using the example of someone who has young kids walking around, what are you going to do? You can't just leave your young kids at home and go somewhere for 2 weeks. That's not going to work. But maybe you can find some hours while they're at school, right? And even if they're not at school with consistent times, maybe, or at least it's consistent from week to week, if not day to day, then sort of have a weekly schedule where you're like, okay, you know what? I know that my Tuesday afternoons and my Wednesday mornings and my Thursday afternoons are deep work time. So this is going to be highly personal to you. What I personally do is very much where my energy is in the moment. So I try not to do my planning too many days ahead of time because I find that too rigid. So I'll usually do my planning sort of day of. So in the morning, I'll be sitting down, planning my day, and identifying some deep work I want to do today. Or maybe I'll have a sense, be okay, tomorrow I'm going to like record a new YouTube video. But then when it is tomorrow's today, I'm waking up. I'm saying, you know what, today I'm going to record that YouTube video, and I kind of like I have a time in mind. It's like I'm going to do this between 1 and 3. So that's how I do it. I kind of squeeze it in here and there. Squeeze it in is not the right word because I do prioritize it, but it's not at the same time of the week for me, and it doesn't have to be for you either. My situation is a bit unusual because, having my own business, being independent, means I have a ton of freedom on how to spend my time. So I have that luxury. A lot of other people are not going to have that. You may not have that. If you're in a corporate environment, you can't just wait to have time. You might have to like block off time on your calendar so people don't schedule meetings with you. So this is very personal based. I don't know how to generalize that. But good question, though. Thank you very much. All right. Got a question from Ranjana who says, I find that I have difficulty doing deep work for more than 2 hours a day. Do you have any tips for increasing the number of hours a person can do deep work? Yeah. So understandable. And I also find it difficult to do like really cognitively hard work for more than just like a handful of hours, maybe 2 hours a day too, So first of all, I think it's very normal. That happens. But I do find myself being able to do different types of deep work more easily on the same day. So if I spend even just 1 hour or 1.5 hours in the morning, like writing a course worksheet, which is like deep work for me, I probably don't want to do more of that later in the day, but I might be cool, or my energy may be fine for recording a video, okay? Or maybe thinking about the design of a new course, about the lesson structure. So I find that it's really helpful to vary the types of deep work I do within one day. That kind of helps me add more deep work hours. I do want to say it's not a realistic expectation to be, working deeply 6 hours a day or even maybe 4 hours a day, 5 days of the week. You may not be able to do that, and I don't think you need to. I think compared with other people, for sure, most people are spending like just a tiny fraction of their time on actual deep work, and most of their time communicating, doing other kinds of shallow work. Okay, so that would be I would mix it up, basically. I see that there's a comment on this as well. Randy wants to know what stops Ranjana from doing it more than 2 hours a day. Energy level, too many direct reports calling for help, or important, too many meetings. Yeah, I think that's a good question. So for me, I just find that my brain sort of gets exhausted for this specific activity. So the same thing. One of the things that I'm doing right now is I'm studying Turkish daily. Because my girlfriend's Turkish, and so I want to be able to communicate with her family a little bit better. And so it's not really a professional activity, I guess. But see, I still kind of consider this deep work because like it requires sustained focus, distraction-free concentration, right? And it creates massive value for me personally, even if maybe not in a business sense. So I can definitely do that, even if I've already spent a ton of time writing stuff for my business earlier in the day. So yeah, I think varying it up makes a ton of sense. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions right now. So if you guys do have a question, please let me know. I'll wait like 30 seconds. There's one is coming in. That's great. Guys got to ask those questions. Otherwise, I'll move to wrapping up soon. So we got Kyla, who says the flow state of deep work is described as a trance-like state that's difficult to enter, meaning a very psychological phenomenon. Is this something you're able to do just on command, which is, I suppose, what you're implying when you say you schedule deep work into your calendar? Did it take years of practice? Yeah, so flow is a very interesting concept, right? By this late Czech, what was he, psychologist, whose name I will not try to pronounce because I'll butcher it. Very interesting. Or was he Hungarian? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So flow is an interesting concept, and it's this idea that very closely related to deep work. You're doing activities that are just at the right level for your capabilities. Not too easy, not too hard, but just sort of like at the max of what you're able to comfortably do, and puts you in this state of flow where you don't notice that you got to go to the bathroom. You don't notice that you're hungry. You're not aware of how much time is passing. It's a very interesting phenomenon. I think many of you may be familiar with this. You may have felt this or feel this from time to time. And so, Kyle, I think definitely related to deep work. In practice, this state of flow that's sometimes what goes on, and I think any of you, if you're like a computer programmer, if you're a software developer, you may be very familiar with this feeling. Sometimes you sit down, you just start working on your program, and suddenly 4 hours of time have elapsed and you're not sure like what the heck just happened. Like all of a sudden it's 4 hours later and you've been working on the same program, didn't get up out of your seat. And so no, I don't think this is something you can do on command. I do think you can help yourself out and increase the probability that you are able to make that happen. Okay, so that's what I was talking about with creating those conditions for focus. Like that flow is probably not going to happen if you've got notifications coming in on your phone or your computer screen or whatever the whole time. Or in normal times where you're sitting in an office with people next to you, they just randomly interrupt you to tell you about something funny that they heard, Sharon, yes, thank you very much, Hungarian-American psychologist. That is exactly what I'm referring to. So people can read up on that. This guy wrote a couple books on flow. Very interesting. So, I think that's related. And I think you can increase the probability that you'll be able to be in that state. I don't think you can do it on command. And it definitely takes practice. Whether, I don't know about attaining the state of flow, but like being able to do your deep work, like sustained focus, that is absolutely a skill. No doubt about it. If you're bad at it, doesn't mean you're forever going to be bad at it. It means you got to practice more. I actually find that mindfulness meditation is an exceptional tool for practicing focus. So we know that a key component of deep work is sustained focus. You got to do it on the right activity. You can focus on something very heavily, but it's super easy for you. That's not deep work. Deep work has to also be like at the limit of what you're cognitively capable of. Okay. But yeah, that is a skill that you got to practice. I like mindfulness meditation to practice focus. Just focusing on the breath or sounds or whatever helps a lot. And if you do it daily, you're going to see a big difference. But you can also just simply practice by like setting aside larger and larger blocks of time on your calendar for doing this. So absolutely. Thanks for asking the question, Kyle. All right. Peter asks, do you use the Pomodoro technique? Or would you say that sort of prevents one from reaching flow? Yeah, so the Pomodoro technique is this, I forget exactly what it is, but it's this idea of working for, is it in 20-minute time blocks, 25-minute time blocks? Maybe a couple times, and then you take a break in between each Pomodoro for a couple minutes, and then after a couple Pomodoros, you take a longer minute or something like that. So I have used this in the past, but I no longer use it because I find 25-minute blocks just too short. Like deep work, that's why I recommend making these blocks at least 60 minutes, but ideally longer. It's just so difficult to actually get in the zone. If it takes you 15 minutes just to like when I'm designing a new course, I've got my mind map that I've been working on that has like the modules and which lessons we're going to cover in each modules and which workbooks there's going to be and in what order am I going to teach things. If I step away from that for a few days and I come back to it, it may take me 15 minutes just to sort of load that whole information back into my brain. And so then in a Pomodoro, I only have 10 minutes left to actually manipulate that information and keep building on it. And that's just not enough. So I don't like Pomodoros too much just because they're too short. Could be helpful for shallow work, though, especially for batched shallow work. So it may be helpful to say, you know what, I'm going to spend 25 minutes working through my email. Yeah, that's what I would say. Probably good for batching your shallow work, but I don't know. I guess if you find yourself being extremely distracted and unable to focus, maybe even 25 minutes of not looking at your phone is difficult for you, then that may be where you are. But I would then have the goal of going beyond the 25 minutes. So practice 25 minutes of putting your phone aside, not looking at it. And then once you've mastered that, go to 30 minutes, 40 minutes, etc. John says this is a comment, not a question. Okay. Planning, structuring, tasking, evaluating, and adjusting are the easy part. Discipline to then follow those steps to completion is tough. Even tougher is committing to and starting the steps of the process. I am long time retired, yet developing career number 4, mostly for the mental challenge. Okay. Yes, I think that's true. I think, well, I don't know if planning is always the easy part. I do think it's possible to be very good at planning your work, whether it's deep work or other work, um, and then not having the discipline to follow through. It's definitely something that a lot of my students struggle with too, but there are things you can do. And so I like to think of, or I like to take the very practical approach of what I was mentioning to you guys earlier, thinking, what can I do to increase the likelihood that I'm going to actually follow through to completion, right? So whether that is you need to do some journaling in the morning to get thoughts out of your head to free up some mental space, or like I said, you got to gently tell your coworker or your spouse or whoever happens to be near you, hey, like I want to work on this now. Do you mind like being quiet for a little while? Do you mind putting on headphones or when you're listening to something, watching something, right? So I think there's actually quite a lot you can do. There's always going to be a certain amount of willpower that you need to do anything for sure, but I do think that you can reduce the willpower threshold with those ancillary projects. Hope that made sense, John. Another question from Kyla, a follow-up from her earlier question. When you schedule your deep work blocks, Kyla asks, would you say you're successful at focusing or performing at deep work levels like 90% of the time or 70%? What do you do if you're unsuccessful? Do you keep trying or switch to other tasks like shallow work? I'm curious to know what would be a good benchmark for me to aim for. Great question. I actually love this question. In terms of percentages, I don't know. Probably 80% at a guess. I don't really know. I'm more interested in the part of your question where you say, what do you do when it's not happening? So this is something that I've been practicing acceptance, that when it's not happening, it's not happening. So sometimes you got deadlines and you just have to do the best you can given the circumstances. I have sort of a luxury in my business where all my deadlines tend to be self-imposed. Sometimes I announce them to the world, but generally self-imposed. It's not like I'm working together with a lot of other people, and that gives me a lot of flexibility. And so if I say early in the day, I say, okay, you know what, today between 1 and 3, I'm really going to work on the sales page. I'm going to write the sales copy for the sales page. And then I find myself after half an hour of trying to do that, just my brain is not cooperating. I can say, you know what, it's not happening today. I'm going to try this again tomorrow. And I used to get extremely frustrated when this was the case, related to me burning out pretty heavily, kind of 2016, 2017, so a couple of years ago now, when I was able to do very little, just being able to do half an hour work a day or 1 hour work a day, any kind of work at that point could have been very stressful for me and very exhausting. And so I found that extremely frustrating. You want to be able to perform optimally every single time, but gradually over time, over the years, and again, my mindfulness meditation practice has really helped with this. I've kind of learned to accept sometimes that today is just not meant to be. So if there's a day when for some reason, like I didn't sleep well or whatever, I may just say, okay, today I'm just going to do simple stuff and I'm going to try again tomorrow, which I think is actually more efficient, So, of course, sometimes take the day off entirely is sometimes not. Depends on what flexibility you have too. Again, my situation is very different than the situation for most people because I kind of like have so much freedom, which you may not if you're working in a team in a corporate environment. Okay, but even then, I think you should not feel guilty about saying, you know what, it's just not happening today. Now, okay, that said, if you find that only 20% of the time when you're planning to do deep work, you're getting to it, then you may need to spend some time improving those conditions. Okay, or like putting on that consultant hat and figuring out like very like dissecting almost what is the problem that is preventing you from getting to it. So I hope that helped, Kyla. Another question. I was wondering how you tie in your deep work with your energy levels. Are you able to schedule deep work even during the times you aren't super energetic? I mean, some days you just don't have a choice. Yeah, I think that's what I talked about just now. Energy level is very important, and so to the extent that you can, I would recommend um, just accepting whatever your energy level is in the moment. Okay. So if you're feeling extremely tired right now, may not be the best time to do that super cognitively demanding work that requires the distraction free concentration. It may just not be meant to happen today. Okay. And I don't mean that in a spiritual way. It's just like it's just not going to happen. So yeah, of course, some days you don't have a choice. Some days, like I said, there are deadlines, whether they're your own deadlines or other people's deadlines, and that's unfortunate. And then you do the best you can. But yeah, I would say you can also get a sense of like what time of the day you're normally going to be pretty fresh, right? Not going to happen every day. It's like, one of the things I also started doing sort of in the past 4 months is started taking weightlifting seriously. And so I've been going to the gym 3 days a week. Got a personal trainer, is all very fun. For some reason, like some days I go lifting, I feel like Superman and I can do everything. And then other days I'm just exhausted. And so at some point, like it really helps to just accept that you're exhausted for whatever reason, even if you don't know the reason. And it's just not happening today. And okay, whatever. This is a bad day. I'm having an off day. And so try again later. Same caveat as what I just said earlier. If it happens too often, then at that point, you're going to have to like do an analysis of what needs changing for the long term. Okay. Cool. Any other questions, folks? Any other questions? Because if not, I'm going to wrap up. Cool. All right. Let's wrap up then. So, go back to my slides. I want to tell you a little bit about the Big Picture Productivity Live program that I'll be running in January and February. So the goal of this program is to make 2021 your most productive year ever. This is a 5-week live program. So we're going to have 11 group calls on Zoom. There's workbooks, lesson slides, a private community, optionally one-on-one access to me. And so this is a program that I designed because, just to give you a little background, earlier this year, I had already had my OmniFocus and Things courses for a couple years, which are courses in which I teach people to use either OmniFocus or Things, which are task managers, to be more productive. And a lot of people are getting great results from that. But I wanted to help people with what I call big picture productivity. So being productive in the big picture sense of the word, not just checking off tasks off your list day to day, but really making progress on your goals. And so being productive in a super meaningful big picture sense of the word. So achieving your goals, meeting your commitments, not like, okay, I went through 12 tasks on my list today. Okay, I went through 14 tasks, great. And so earlier this year, I created a self-paced course called Big Picture Productivity, okay? With the aim of helping people do exactly this. But I found that a lot of my students were getting stuck on the course because it was self-paced. Like this is something that really requires a lot of effort to some introspection. Okay, and I just found that a self-paced course was not the right format for teaching this material and for getting my students the best possible results. So I reimagined this whole program as a live program. And so maybe you've heard me talk about big picture productivity before, and now it's a live program. That's why. So I realized that I needed to be involved a lot more. So we're going to run this in January and February. Like I said, it's going to be 5 weeks, bunch of Zoom calls, basically, where I'll be teaching, and there'll be office hours as well, and workbooks with materials to work through, all with the goal of making 2021 your most productive year ever. And we're going to do that in a really systematic way. So what are some of the topics that we're going to cover in big picture productivity? Organizing your existing commitments. So, we all have existing commitments, right? Things that are sort of ongoing commitments as parents, as maybe spouses, or as employees or business owners or volunteers or whatever. Okay. So we want to make sure that you're really on top of everything there, as well as working on the big picture stuff, achieving your goals. So we're going to develop a new habit of your choice. I'm not going to dictate what habit that is. We're going to do that. So we're going to take the opportunity, it'd be in early 2021, to set the tone for a productive year by really, developing a healthy new habit right off the bat. Okay. I'm going to ask you guys or invite you guys to stay accountable with a progress log that you're posting to every week, ideally. Which is accountability towards yourself mostly, but is also nice to be able to share with other people what progress you're making. And I find that really helps people stay on track. So we're going to discuss clarifying your goals. A lot of people have goals, but they're maybe vague goals, or they're goals that you really haven't been able to make progress on for a long time. So we're just going to see, can we get as clear as possible on what it is that you want? And then we're going to translate your goals into action. So we're going to create actionable projects so that you can just make progress towards your goals. You're not going to achieve all of your goals in 5 weeks. That's not what it is. But you're going to learn a system for clarifying your goals and sharpening them and translating them into things you can take action on so that you are making consistent progress towards them. And another very important thing is we're going to talk about how to plan your quarter, your week, and your day. So how can you plan ahead and making sure that you're not sitting down in the moment every time. Okay, what am I going to do now? So that you have a plan. Because Big Picture Productivity is a live program, it's the first time I'm doing it as a live program. I don't have any words from existing students who've taken it yet because it's new. So I figured I would share just a couple of words from people who've taken some of my other courses so you can kind of get an impression of what people say. Joachim said, I wish all my colleagues would take Peter's course. Again, it's one of my other courses, but I'm putting a lot of effort into this new program. And Joachim said, everyone can learn something, and my life would be a lot easier if everyone around me was as organized as I am now. So I love hearing that. Mark said, Peter's course brought a couple of breakthrough moments for me that were quite literally life-changing. I know that sounds dramatic, but when everything you do stems from this workflow system and someone removes a clog from your system, it really is life-changing. Finally, we got Violet, another one of my students, who said, I went from 50% productivity to 1,000%. I finished my 2 university courses this August with an A and an A+, and at the same time launched 2 new products while maintaining her business and its current products all in 1 month. Okay, so those are some of the results that people have gotten from my courses. To enroll in the course, you head over to bigpictureproductivity.com. And there is a $100 early bird discount for enrolling in the program. It expires in a few hours. Okay, so it expires today at 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern time, which is a couple hours from now. Okay, so you'll still be able to enroll for another week from now, roughly. But if you want that early bird $100 discount, you got to enroll in the next few hours. Okay, that was it for today. Thank you all very much for showing up. Couldn't do my webinars without an audience. So thank you very much for being here. If you got any questions about Big Picture Productivity or about the stuff that we talked about today, you're always welcome to email me. My email address is peter@peterruckys.net. And you can also just find my website at peterruckys.net. So thanks again, everybody. Have a really great evening. Ciao.